Hello, my name is Walter de Oliveira. I am a professor at Federal University of Santa Catarina, Brazil, and it's a great pleasure to be a part of the ESMED Congress 2021. And I came here today with a presentation about osteosarcoma based on a research project conducted by Dr. Idonézia Benett and myself for the purpose of the doctoral program of Dr. Benett. And particularly, we'll be talking about the use of blogs as a strategy to cope with osteosarcoma. So what we are planning to do is talk a little bit about the nature of osteosarcoma and how it affects people and how people use blogs as a strategy to deal with this problem. So I'm going to put on the screen the presentation and try to have a good understanding of what was the scope and the results of our research. Let me share the screen here. So, okay. Well, I hope you are looking at the PowerPoint presentation right now. So we'll start speaking about what osteosarcoma is. Osteosarcoma is the most common form of primary bone cancer and the fourth most common kind of cancer in children and adolescents. It affects long bones, mainly in legs, more than half in the femur, also in the humerus, tibia, pelvis, and jaws. It occurs mainly in the second decade of life. And the second decade of life, it coincides exactly with the intense bone growth of the pubertal stretch phase. Epidemiologically, osteosarcoma affects about 150 per million cases in children up to age of 12 per year. And in the ages of 15 to 19, we have a prevalence of 8 to 18 cases per million per year. And in Brazil, we have 350 new cases each year. This is data from 2020. Osteosarcoma has a special need for early diagnosis, like most kinds of cancers. So normally the treatment involves surgery. The surgery many times includes amputation and also the use of aggressive chemotherapy. The survival rates in non-metastatic patients, and most of the metastases are on the lungs, is 70% in 5 years. Measured after 5 years, 70% of the affected patients are alive. But with relapses, the survival rate drops to 20% in a year, can reach 40% in 5 years, with possible, when possible, to completely remove lung metastases and using aggressive chemotherapy. In other words, we're talking about a very aggressive kind of cancer that affects people in early ages, like children and adolescents, and with a high rate of mortality. Now, what does it mean to be a child growing up to adolescence and have cancer? Let's think about what are the worries of that passage phase from childhood to adolescence. That's the time when the people is getting a sense of their own identity or a new identity in the world, a new place, a new social place in the world. When they develop a sense of a body image, that's when they are very self-aware of their bodies and the importance of their bodies as a social element. And this body image has to do also with how they perceive themselves as wanted or unwanted, desired or not desired people, able or not to be attractive, able or not to effective involvement. It affects the way they're going to get into romantic involvements, effective involvements, generally speaking, affect their sexual identity. There's a lot to do with peer pressure, how peers are going to perceive them, how peers are going to accept them, how popular they will be. But also it's a time when they think about the future, educationally speaking, career, employment, and even building a new family. So as osteosarcoma implies in many times in surgery, and implies in amputation, and implies in scars, implying affecting mobility with the bones. The body image can be also very affected. So what happens then? What are the risks of a negative body image? What are the most important elements that we can perceive? First of all, of course, it gets to a possibility of a low self-image, a low self-esteem. And this low self-esteem can affect concentration. People have difficulty in concentrating, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, sexual health problems. There's a sense of what do I mean for others? What do I mean for the world? And a sense of being perceived as objects of pity, which is terrible for an adolescent who wants to be perceived himself or herself as an object of admiration, as an object of desire, an object of affection, being seen as an object of pity. And the social status changes from being healthy to being disabled. So this is the general basic ideas that led us to think about our research question, which was, what is the impact of osteosarcoma on young adults patients' lives? How does osteosarcoma affect them? Well, what are the general issues that may impact significantly those lives? First, we can talk about psychological implications of diagnosis and living with osteosarcoma. Is still not very much explored in the literature. We didn't find much literature exploring that kind of situation. How do people feel about living with osteosarcoma, having osteosarcoma? How does it affect people? So we could see that, we could think, we could imagine, we could have the thesis that physical and mental suffering occur especially due to relapses, metastasis, and amputation, and that's what we found out as a truth. The real problem for most people is when it comes to the treatment, surgery, amputation, scars, and all that brings to was a necessary treatment. And also the fact that people start to live with the sensation that they may die at any moment, because the high risk of the high mortality rate, people start to live with the idea of death. Death becomes real, becomes something that may happen at any time, which is not the what we see normally as a nature of adolescence. Adolescence is a time, especially when people perceive themselves more strong and not prone to die at any moment. So in our research, we discovered that some people looking for coping with all these problems, coping with their anxiety, coping with the presence of death, coping with the body self-image negatively affected, try to cope in different ways. And one of the ways that we found out was using blogs, using narratives, using a way of expressing themselves, talking about their life, their disease, their problems, the barriers that they find, and this seems to give them not only some relief, but also re-signify their lives, make them to feel again that they became somehow useful for other people, useful for other adolescents, useful for other children, for parents, for families, for many that are affected by this disease. And so we went out knowing about that and started to look for these blogs. And we found that in Brazil, where we did our research, several states, they have blogs. One problem is that the blogs sometimes finish for different reasons, including for people dying. So we looked for blogs that were sustained regularly for a certain amount of time, at least 3 months time. We looked for blogs that were public, meaning have open access. Anyone can go there and see these blogs. You don't need a special password, or is not a closed informational social media. And we look for blogs that were only in Portuguese. So there are some of the criteria to include the blog. And we found and included in our research 8 blogs. We also looked for blogs that at least once a week would put some kind of narrative with a certain length, not only few lines, but we came to a number of words that gives about 2 pages per week. And most of these blogs have as characteristics being put out by Brazilians between 14 and 32 years of age. And of the 8 blogs, 7 were done by females. We then started to get the posts in those blogs to look and analyze using a hermeneutic phenomenological method that used by Paul Ricoeur. And we did this collection between June 2017 through March 2018. And we found a few themes using that kind of methodology, in which the hermeneutical phenomenological approach invites us to get the things as they are, as they present itself, without much elaboration from the part of the researcher. Our our goal is to show as much as possible the richness of the narrative without editing, without much elaboration. We edit only for language or continuation of phrasing and so forth. And we found the richness of narratives incredible, richness. But for this presentation, for the length of time that we want to dedicate here, we chose to talk about three things. The first theme is access, and the three themes actually chosen for this presentation are themes related to the relationship of the patients with the system, relationships of the patients with the barriers. That's the second theme, the barriers that they start to deal with after being diagnosed, after starting to assume daily life with osteosarcoma. And the third theme about the doctor-patient relationship. And the first one, access. Now, the problem of access for osteosarcoma patients is not a trivial one. Let's think about in two ways. One is the access in the sense of how the system allows people to be well received. So you feel like the system is open to you. You feel like the system is receives you well, gives you clear indications of what to do and how to proceed, help you. And the Brazilian public health system is proud of doing this kind of things, and it's a principle for the Brazilian system, a good access. Besides being universal, is also to be accessible to all. And we're talking about both these characteristics of access, of people being well received, but also the access geographically, materially speaking. Where do you go? Where is it that I can go to solve my problem? So the people that talk about this in blogs, how does come out in blogs? That's the question. That's how this became a theme of the research, because there are especially three things that people talk about. First one is access to specialized treatment. Osteosarcoma is a disease that demands for technological equipment, sophisticated technological equipment, sophisticated laboratory for diagnosis, sophisticated ways of images, tomographies, and so forth. Now, this kind of specialized service is not common in all of the country. You will find this mainly in capitals. Not all capitals are very well served by those kinds of services. You will find it in big cities, like important cities, even not being capitals, but you will not find that kind of service in many small towns, many middle-sized towns. So people have to travel sometimes long distances, because Brazil is a big country, it's a huge country. So we may travel hours by car, by bus, sometimes by plane, to get to a place where you can have access to a specialized service. And this becomes an additional problem for people with osteosarcoma. They not only deal with the problems in their bodies, the problems in their minds, but they also deal with this concrete material problems of distancing, of transportation, and so forth. Sometimes they need to go to private services. Public health services in certain regions are not so well served, and then you have to go to health private insurance plans, and that makes it much more expensive for families to getting access. And also the other problem with access is the bureaucracy. I mean, we're talking about here, not our view, but what came out in the narratives. And we're going to show, following some of the excerpts, how we got to exemplify. But the health services bureaucracy can be not only very complicated, but also very cruel, because sometimes you're dealing with a person that traveled 5 hours, 6 hours, forgot a document, or do not have a certain document that is necessary for being attended, and sometimes just receive a no. You cannot be served today, you have to come back tomorrow. But how are you going to come back tomorrow living 6, 7 hours, 10 hours from where you are? You have to get back home, come back another day, maybe next week, maybe some other time when it's possible. So these are real issues for people with osteosarcoma. What is the context then? And you have a disease where the patients need early diagnosis, meaning need fast, agile attendance, need to be sped, need some speed on what they're doing, because it's a matter of life and death. How early you are diagnosed, how early you can prevent metastases. For example, early treatment, you need emotional support. So if you come to a service where you need emotional support, you don't want to find just a bureaucratic answer to you, a dehumanized kind of attention. You want to feel welcomed. You want to feel that people is really interested in you, that they are solidary. And sometimes you'll find just that bureaucratic wall. So the relationship with health services and the problem of access can be one that favors having a successful relationship from the point of view of emotional support or a frustration. So in this context, people, and I'll give you some of the thoughts here in the blogs. This one, for example, she writes, wait. The requested time was passing. I had already been referred to INSS. This is the Social Service Institute in Brazil. I had to be away from work, and I was already walking with the help of a crutch. No results. What's going on? So that's the talk of a person that all of a sudden realizes that she depends on some kind of agility that she doesn't find. Wait. That's the sentiment that the what she goes against. And here's another one. That was what I definitely didn't want to hear. It was an osteosarcoma metastasis. 9 months had passed from suspicion to diagnostic confirmation. This is a lady that talks about her narrative of being for months, going back and forth, and the system, uh, the bureaucratic time was not in tune with the needed time for a good treatment. The health insurance plan has not yet authorized endoprosthesis. It is a pity that bureaucracy delays treatment. Nobody knows how to measure how harmed I will be. So in the blogs, one of the things we found out, and that's what's going to comes out more in this presentation, is people having a sense that they need a voice to denounce this kind of situations. And it's interesting because these are 8 people who were able to do this, who found this way to put their claims out, to put their voices out to be heard. But what about the many patients that do not do that because either they don't have access to internet, enough technology to do a blog, or even the skills or the inclination. But most of the blog narratives, and these of course are excerpts of longer posts, but what we found is that the people also talk about the relief that they had for the opportunity of speaking. And maybe contrasting with the fact that some other people have not the opportunity to put it out of the system, to get this kind of relief. As one more, this is about a procedure. So this procedure was performed on an outpatient basis, as it would be a conventional one, until it was authorized a little ointment that would only make the meat fall asleep, and then she sighs. The cut did not hurt, but they had to introduce an object in the shape of a T into the bone. Think about the pain inside my tibia, which already hurt a lot. It was unbearable. Now, it's interesting because the 2 last ones talk about the authorization, which means you go to have a procedure, and you present your card from your health insurance plan, and the health insurance plan has to authorize that procedure. And they have a catalog. You have plan, say, golden plan. Then you are authorized a certain number of procedures, different that you have a silver plan, or different categories. They will authorize certain things and not others. One of the problems that we found in the narrative is that this authorization sometimes takes weeks, sometimes a month, and it's not understood exactly why this happens, and that's what the patients find this barrier, because it should be a simple thing. You look at what is to be authorized or not, and make a decision. But they found out that bureaucracy is too much of a barrier. Well, let's see another kind of barrier that was verbalized by people, the physical barriers. What kind of physical barriers we can talk about here? The main ones that we found or the ones related to mobility, transportation, architectural designs, and uneven roads, very much referred as well. As we think about mobility, that's obvious. I mean, a person who has now an amputated limb has well, even if it was not amputated by, there was an intervention, and their legs or their arms are harmed to a point that they don't walk the same way as before. They have not the same agility as before. So there are issues of mobility. Now we're talking also about the mobility from the point of view of distance. How do you get to the place you need to go? To treatment, to work, to different places, and people that could before have their own cars, for example, and are not able to drive anymore. They are not yet equipped with a new kind of car specified for their kind of deformity, if there's one. So this issue is not a trivial one. The issue of mobility, as well as transportation, as well as architectural designs, things that in normal life we don't even pay attention, like stairs, like sidewalks, like, you know, all kinds of devices we have inside of the house, outside of the house, in cities, the equipments in cities, in bus stops. All of this become very, very much an issue that we don't even think about it every day, in everyday life for other people. But the osteosarcoma patients have now it present on an everyday basis. Uneven roads, and we're talking not only about uneven roads because of for cars, even for cars, if you're in a small car, in a 3 hours, 4 hours trip, shaken, but also the sidewalks. You have to walk sometimes, or you have to use a wheelchair. So what's the context we have here? We have the context of the consequences of surgery, with deformities, amputations, scars, functional impairment, reduced mobility, postural, flexibility, and body balance problems caused by osteosarcoma. So how is the context of everyday life living with this? Is the question of physical limitations, the routine of rehabilitation, meaning your routine changes. Life was before going to play tennis, going to the movies, going to school. Your routine was one very rich, and becomes now a great part of the time is going to hospitals, is going to physical therapy, is going to different kind of specialized treatment, and a constant self-awareness, partly because of that I have to go because now I have a leg that is in bad shape, I have metastases, I can't breathe well, I don't sleep. So you become much more self-centered in terms of your health problem. Constantly hiding deformed limbs. And this is a big and huge problem for many, because the shame of having a deformity, an amputated part of your body, you feel like people is looking at you all the time. In the sequelae represent an identity tag, reminding that they are survivors living daily with cancer. So cancer becomes a daily situation, a constant situation, all-time situation. Every time, every minute that passes, you think about this problem. Now, Your mind is set on it. So some of the narratives come in blogs like this. After a long workout with my crutches, we finally got to the elevator. I had never stopped to think about the issues of accessibility in the world. In my situation, this will be everyday practice from now on. So now, even going to an elevator, even going to the bathroom, going from here to there, from point A to point B, is now something that is not really just going. There is a whole planning, there's a whole procedure to go for each of these things. The 13 are the attitudinal barriers. What are called attitudinal barriers? What we talk about here is how people see, treat, perceive, and how this in turn make my perception based on other people's perceptions, and that involves prejudice, stigma, and we can also talk here about the doctor. That's where it fit inside of the theme, the doctor-patient relationships. That's the context. You have now a person whose body image and the sense of identity are influenced by osteosarcoma. There's no way of escaping it. You are, and a part of you is what osteosarcoma does to you. How does it affect you? It may create a negative perception of your body image. And this negative perception make you worry about other people's reactions, because you are ashamed of your body. You're ashamed of you show to people, makes you worry about what they are going to think about looking at you, and it was very self-aware of your ugliness or your defects. So the reactions makes the patients to all the time try to hide their bodies in some way, try to hide their deformities, try to hide what they think people's not going to accept. So it's particularly bad for young females, we found out. Young females, and also just we found out, but it's in the small literature out there. We have some references that show that for young females seem to be worse than for the rest of the population. For young females present higher risk for negative body image, problems related to sexual identity, and being afraid of rejection by peers. So it seems like these are the fraction of the population that gets it worse. Let's see some of the narratives. This lady says, "We are discriminated even on the hospital premises for wearing a mask, and people no longer come near you thinking that you are some contagious disease, and you have some contagious disease. And in fact, we use masks to avoid catching any disease." This is of course before the pandemics. There's now, it's common to have people with masks, but because people with cancer had to prevent getting worse, catching a disease, catching a infection, many used masks in hospitals, even in the reception, to avoid any kind of complication. So we got this excerpt here. There's another one. "I've lost count of how many times I caught people looking at me, curious, puzzled looks that raise question marks. I would prefer them to ask me what is it that I have kill your curiosity, finish your doubts, and not look at me as if I was a strange being. I think this epitomizes all the that we're talking about a few minutes ago. How bad people feel, of people perceiving, at least, that people is always looking at them, and of course they imagine, or they're looking at me because the state I'm at, and I say they perceive because you have no way to know what's going on really, but in the minds of the osteosarcoma patient, if people look at them, it's because of their deformities, it's because of their ugliness, it's because of their scars, it's because of their amputated limbs, it's because of being objects of pity. So I think this catches very much all this state of mind. The other thing is the issues related to independence and social exclusion. Reduced mobility, pain, and impairment may lead to a sense of uselessness, denying opportunities in the world of work. So affects very much work, because you have this sense of uselessness in work, and people feel like other people are discriminating them at work. Changes in daily life may bring a sense of lost life significance, and identity loss is greatly responsible for social exclusion. So in other words, the osteosarcoma patient may suffer discrimination and prejudice, and may perceive that they are excluded. So they themselves may exclude themselves, that's one thing, but also they may be actually excluded. Excluded not necessarily in an active way of being excluding them actively, but for the circumstances. Excluded because they are not fit for work, they are not invited to certain things because people feel they are not able to do these things anymore. So let's see some of the narratives. In this game of just waiting here, just waiting there, you lose hours and hours and more hours of your life sitting on a bench, looking at walls, ceilings, floors, other patients. So that catches the sense of significance in life. You don't feel like anymore that you are sitting because you are looking at the nature, because you are having fun, but because you have no other thing to do. Just sitting there, and as she said, waiting here, waiting there, you lose hours and hours and more hours of your life. So what you really feel is that your life has been lost in all this time, the waiting time. That particular problem for osteosarcoma patients is the professional stigma, the work stigma, and how this also helps to ruin plans for the future that already affected by the disease itself. So how did we feel that this happened? First, the risk of discrimination for revealing a cancer diagnosis. People feel like if they say they have cancer at work or in some other social location, it may be discriminated just for having the cancer. Also, they have jeopardized professional experience. How this happened? Because you start to have lack of activity at work, and this lack of labor activity brings disadvantages for competition in the labor market. So the less you work, the less you have opportunities for work, of course. So what the patient feels is that even though they feel that they are able to work, but they either for discrimination or for other reasons, they're going to work less and less. So they have a sense of more and more being um, detached from the opportunities of work and, of course, of the future, of the plans for the future. Now, think about it talking about adolescents, talking about young adults, talking about children. So, adolescents sometimes in the beginning of their work life, young adults in the beginning of their work life, where most plans for the future are present. That gets worse with deformity or need for special accommodations in the workplace. And then sometimes people offer accommodations for that particular kind of situation. But for the patient, from the point of view of the patient, that gets even worse because it feels like different from others. And we are not claiming anything here or getting judgmental. It's just how people feel, how they talk about it, how they put it out in their blogs, how they have expressed themselves, and that's what we try to catch. Um, the thing is that they changed their status. They were perceived as employable to partially or totally incapacitated for work. From the same person that before the diagnosis were praised, for example, as a good worker in any career, all of a sudden start to be seen as incapacitated, not able to work anymore. Another thing that the patients are aware, and it actually was interesting to see in the blogs, is about the financial burden for themselves, but also for others. So it's very interesting. It's captured here in the say here. Strong are those families that, despite few financial resources, abandon their homes and take shelter in pensions, hotels, or support homes without privacy and comfort. Courageous are the patients who resign their jobs and depend on government assistance projects. And let the truth be told, to get any benefit, the procedures are so bureaucratic that many give up halfway. In addition, what the government offers is so insignificant that it is embarrassing to mention it in the first place. That's very powerful analysis. The person's, but shows the impact not only on the patient but on all families, people who have to sometimes leave their homes because a catastrophic disease can mean a financial burden of incalculable size. So it's very powerful how they talk about, but also shows the support that families go for a member of their families. There's a beauty in it, of course, and also the the conscience about collective burden. Capture here and this say the money that the government has already spent on me was much higher than with most of you, because treating cancer is expensive, very expensive. So there is a conscience about it. Now, the last theme that we brought about here is how we're told stories on the narratives, on the posts about doctor-patient relationship. And many stories, most of the stories we found were not positive stories, unfortunately. So we hope to bring this about, of course, to contribute to more awareness about the importance of that kind of relationship. Let's see this one here. Be careful when choosing your doctors. I never imagined that I had cancer. Maybe that's why I was willing to be seen by the first person available. The doctor, instead of investigating my case, gave me a diagnosis of tendinitis. There's an error there. Anti-inflammatory drugs and physical therapy. There were 4 orthopedists before the 5th, sent by God, take my case seriously. So you can see the contrast between the doctors that did not believe that they needed to take the issue seriously, against the 5th doctor that was actually said by the patient that sent by God. So much importance was given to that person that took the case seriously. Another one. Whenever the pain appeared, I looked for an orthopedist, but it was mild pain. And whenever I went, they asked for x-rays, and the x-rays did not show anything. I took anti-inflammatory drugs which masked the pain and postponed the discovery. Discovery, of course, is the diagnosis. And that's how tricky it can be, the need for deeper investigation in clinical settings. Sometimes mild pain can be treated or not investigated enough and postpone a diagnosis, and that can mean life or death sentence. I then went back to see the same doctor. There's another one for new referrals. By this time, my knee had already a slight increase in volume. After the exam, the doctor maintained the diagnosis, stated that tendinitis is more common in winter, and prescribed 10 physical therapy sessions. It's another one. The 4th doctor was the one who requested my first MRI scan. I wrote this. The right word might be irresponsibility. This may be an inflammation, or even a tumor, but you can return to your usual activities and return to me in 3 months. At that time, I was limping constantly, and pain was my companion. Amazing. How does someone say that you may have a tumor and that you should return 3 months later? No comments. Actually, let me get back. One comment. The importance of paying attention to how you communicate with your patient. The patient has a notion of how bad things can be. When you mention the word tumor for a patient is a very big sign. Another one. Oh, we got this one already. It's here again. So what we were talking about here is, of course, the idea of how we have people who have certain diagnoses, certain diseases, certain problems that calls for much dedication, calls for much emotional support. Sometimes we don't even know what's going on with the person that comes. We don't know where that person comes from, how many hours took to be in front of my desk, how long, how suffering, how was that night before coming to hear a diagnosis. I think we're talking here is about sensibility. Is how much doctors, how much health professionals, how much a health system has to be humanized, has to be solidary, has to be aware of every human being. Every life is important. Every life and every human being, it must be object of careful attention. And that's what this research led us to conclude. So I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for being here. And I'm at your service when needed. You may contact me at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, Walter de Oliveira, Idonézia, Benett. We hope to have a wonderful Congress. Thank you.